Now, let's talk about Sophocles. I think it's always worth mentioning the playwright, just at least to say, who was this person? What did he or she write about? How did he or she see the world? What were his or her general approaches? One of the things we see in all of Sophocles' plays, or at least the ones we have, right, is his belief that universal rhythm and order rules the world. And we're kind of familiar with that notion of universal rhythm. Not that. That is not the kind of universal rhythm and order I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the idea of, there we go. Every morning, the sun comes up. Every evening, it sets. You can figure out the change and the constant when it comes to sunrises and sunsets. The Greeks looked up at the stars and said, hey, look, they move around the sky in somewhat the same pattern. They studied that. They also, because they paid attention, took a look at the seasons and said, wow, these things seem to change at roughly the same time. They weren't the first people to do that. But you can see how somebody like Sophocles, or the ancient Greeks in general, would believe that the world is not just this messy, chaotic, dangerous, terrifying thing, but in fact there is a pre-existing rhythm and order. There is even, say the Greeks, a rhythm and order that rules over the gods. So Zeus may be really powerful, but he still has to answer to the larger rhythms and orders and structures of the universe. Fate, to bring that back in for a quick second, fate is one of those things, right? The Greeks believed that fate was something that existed above and beyond the power of the gods. One of the things this lets us know is that if things get out of line, if the world gets screwed up somehow, any wrongdoing, anything getting messed up will naturally be corrected. Sophocles and many of the ancient Greeks looked at the world and said, all right, sometimes we have a drought year. That gets corrected by a very rainy year. If the crops fail this year, things will come around and it'll all work out. If summer's too hot, don't worry, fall is coming soon. There's this key belief in Sophocles' works that if things go wrong, that they will be corrected in and of their own accord. The other important thing Sophocles was really big on was this relationship between the living and the dead. Sophocles and many ancient Greeks believed in the tremendous importance of not only worshiping the gods, but worshiping your ancestors. So here's what I mean. If your dad dies, it is your job as a son, and again, we're just talking about men here because the ancient Greeks were very sexist. It is your job as a son to bury your father in the backyard, and then in your house to set up a little shrine to him that has a sacred fire burning in it. You got to keep that sacred fire burning, and you need to every day pay homage to your dead father. You need to remember who he was, and literally, right? We look at our ancestors as gods, and that they are powerful people. Here's a great example of this. There was a famous Greek naval battle, and the winning generals of this naval battle returned to Athens, all victorious, and the Athenian government said, hey, you guys brought the dead people back, right? Because we have to bury them. If we don't bury them, they will become ghosts, and basically they will haunt us, and they'll be miserable for eternity. And the general said, well, no, it was a sea battle, and we couldn't collect all of the dead people. We couldn't collect our dead soldiers. The generals were executed for failing to do that. That's how important burying your dead is, and that's how important respecting your ancestors is. So you can see in Sophocles a real reflection of the structure and the sort of belief in an order to the world that we saw in some of the other places in ancient Greece. So those funeral rites, the beginning, middle, and end of a funeral, all the different specific things you do when you're burying somebody, where you bury them, and then after they're dead, how you sort of take care of their memory and make sure they don't become a ghost or unhappy with you. That's really important. So think about that notion of lineage when you think about Oedipus, because it's kind of a problem. One more cultural context I definitely want to talk about with regards to ancient Greece. You know about the gods. The religious aspect of ancient Greece is pantheistic. That means there are multiple gods, right? Pan is a root word that means many or all. So the Greeks saw gods in everything nature-oriented. All of the Greek gods are tied to some kind of natural phenomenon. The sun, the ocean, thunderbolts, all sorts of fun stuff, right? Those gods are also, just like the Greek society, organized in a hierarchical sense. That is, they are, we got Zeus at the top, and then people answer to other people, and you have medium gods and small gods of small things, and right? But there's a hierarchy and an organization to it. They are pervasive. The gods are everywhere. Like I said before, there's a temple to every damn god you can imagine all over Athens. So you can't walk down the street of Athens without seeing the evidence of how important the gods are. And there is an interesting flexibility and almost a flawed nature to these gods. If you know anything about ancient Greek mythology, you know that the gods were not very nice to humans. And you know that they weren't very nice to each other. We tend, from a modern Judeo-Christian standpoint, to think of God as being all-knowing, all-seeing, and perfect. The Greeks didn't think that for 1 second. Their gods were deeply flawed. They got into fights and wars and jealous, all kinds of stuff, right? So it's a very different view. The gods are in charge, absolutely. But humans, the gods may not like you very much. And there really isn't much you can do about that. A recurring story in all of ancient Greek mythology is Zeus sleeps with some human. Zeus's wife, Hera, goes and finds that human and says, "This was your fault," and does something really awful to that human. And that wasn't the person's fault at all. They just got in trouble because the gods are not very nice. They're flawed. So, one of the summary views of all of this, but especially the notions that we talked about with regards to Sophocles and with regards to the gods, is this notion that the Greeks believe the world is fundamentally chaotic, and it will always be. But also, there's this wonderful contradiction. There is a natural order to that chaos, and we Athens, in everything that we do, we reflect that order. We reflect the idea that, okay, it may seem chaotic, but there is a significant notion in Athenian culture that it is our job to bring order to that chaos and to reflect those pre-existing ordered hierarchical aspects: sunrise, sunset, the seasons, the gods. When you look at and think about Oedipus, think about how it reflects these religious views, especially regarding these contradictions. Chaos and order. Provide me with an annotation here and or bring something in to talk about in class with regards to how this play approaches the notions of order and chaos. That's the lecture for today.